What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and as predicted, She-Hulk Episode 1 was amazing. I will run over different Easter eggs and things like that happened over the course of the show, but all in all, it was a great episode. I absolutely loved the first episode. I laughed, I cried over how bad the She-Hulk CGI was. I just had a great time. You know, in some ways, and I know it wasn't their intention, but in some ways, it feels like a low-budget sci-fi like movie or show. It obviously wasn't low budget, like it cost a ton of money to make, but it just feels kind of like that, right? It's just campy and like you can't take it seriously, which makes sense because She-Hulk was never a superhero that anybody could take seriously. It was just one of those things where it was like, I mean, you know, like she's there and does stuff sometimes, and she had like 3 great moments in her character's history, one of which was when she met the Living Tribunal for like 2 seconds. But outside of that, right, I mean, it's just kind of like, you know, whatever, man, like she exists, you know, like she's a thing that exists. But the show itself, I think where the She-Hulk comics have consistently just never made her interesting, the show makes her wildly fascinating. I'm really interested in it. And I have to say, like, the origin story that she got, it has to be some kind of record, right? I mean, there's never been a time where I've ever seen an origin story happen that fast. She's like, so like, we were driving down the road and like a Sakaran spaceship appeared out of nowhere. We got into a car wreck, I got cut, Banner bled into me, and then boom, I'm She-Hulk now. Done and done. And it's just like, wow, that was quick. That was really fast, right? Like it was, you know, it was a quick origin. But honestly, I love that it was that fast. I love that it was that quick. In a lot of ways, I kind of get burned out on the idea that they take like a whole episode to explain a person's origin, right? Like what makes She-Hulk interesting, you know, I guess what passes for interesting in the comics is like her trying to balance a life between being a lawyer and like being the Hulk, and the fact that she's like a lawyer for superheroes in the comics. But in this, I love the whole thing of her just like picking up the swing of what it means to be a Hulk right off the bat. And one of the things that I do love that I think is going to be a plot point that comes back later on is how quickly she just kind of brushes off basically everything she's been taught by Banner. Because even though you do have them just sort of reconciling and like Banner's trying to tell her, hey, look, like you have to understand with this level of power that you have, you could just get mad one day and like people will die. Like a town of people could be killed, or you could destroy a building and it could collapse on top of like tons of innocent people. The amount of collateral damage you can create just by being irritated and just transforming into your She-Hulk form and not being able to control it, it's very, very dangerous. And you'll start drawing the attention of all kinds of the wrong people, government agents, different organizations that want to like harvest you for your power, like kill you, take your blood, that kind of a thing. There's a lot of stuff that can come out of it. So while she did initially sort of just kind of blow all that off, to a degree, she still kind of has. Now, we don't necessarily know how things sort of fit in between the ending of the episode or the ending of the origin that we got and where she picks up in the courtroom. A few things may have likely happened in between. In fact, the show might probably go back and revisit some of those in terms of flashbacks. I'm not entirely sure. But all in all, the show was fun. I had a great time watching it. It was an absolute blast. It was every bit as fun as I hoped it would be. I'm excited to see where things go. Some of the moments in the show were a little bit weird, I will say, like when she was standing outside dressed as a hooker and then like those guys walk up and like they start giving her a hard time. I mean, I guess it makes sense they would have done that. It would have seemed just a little uninteresting if they had been like, hey, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm waiting on my cousin. And they're like, okay, cool. And they get in their car and drive away. I guess that would have been a very like interesting thing. I guess an interesting moment for her to transform. I don't really know why they went with that. But the whole point that I'm making here is the show, it's like anything else. It's got some questionable moments where it's kind of like, I don't really know, right? Titania just like busts into the courtroom looking like a wrestler from the 1980s who also happens to like moonlight as a prostitute. But outside of that, there were like a few things that were kind of like, it is what it is. But having said that, when it came to the Easter eggs in this, right? When it came to the Easter eggs in this whole thing, there were a ton of them, right? Probably the one that everybody's talking about is the question that we get answered as to whether or not Captain America died a virgin. Now, let me tell you something, man. Even if we didn't find out that Captain America had like banged Peggy Carter, which of course we know that he basically had, at the very least when he went back and lived his life, I can almost guarantee you that he banged Emily Van Camp's character in the MCU. There's no way it didn't happen. I mean, look at the two of them, like how they interact in like Falcon and the Winter, not Falcon and Winter Soldier, and Captain America and the Winter Soldier. I mean, you know they were probably knocking boots. But outside of that, we get an answer to that where it's like, nope, he actually lost his virginity to like some random chick on a carrier, right? Like it happened in like 1940, what is it, 42, 43? I can't remember what they said, but like it happened, right? So like he didn't die a virgin, which is kind of funny, right? It's cool that we finally got an answer to that. It was interesting that they gave us that in a post-credit scene, which I'm surprised to see that like there's even a post-credit scene in the first episode. I feel like a lot of the shows have kind of gone into this pattern of like, you don't get a post-credit scene until like the second half of the show's run. So I'm glad to see, even if it was just a comedic moment, we got that little post-credit scene there. I love the scene actually fit in with the overall tone of the show, the kind of campy, comedic tone of the show so far. As far as Titania goes, I'm curious to see what they do with her, because in the comics, she got her origins or got her powers from Doctor Doom. Not only that, Titania actually had a role in Secret Wars, the original Secret Wars in 1984. I mean, I don't know if she's gonna have any role in like the Avengers Secret Wars film, and honestly, I doubt she does. I think she'll just be another casualty of Marvel Studios' inability to make their villains interesting. So like, I think that's what's gonna go on there. She may survive and go on to the future of things, but I'm not entirely sure where her journey is gonna take her. There was, of course, like the Hulk clap, right? That was really cool. That kind of came out wrong. The Hulk has the clap. There was not that. The thunder clap that the Hulk does, that was a cool thing, right? That was a cool little moment. It's one of those small things that you get to see, and then you see She-Hulk do her own variation of it. Now, I think that highlights one of the cool things about She-Hulk is that she's not a copy pasta version of the Incredible Hulk. If Marvel Studios had done that, if they had been like, here's She-Hulk, who's just a copy of Bruce Banner, it would have just taken away from any interest in her character whatsoever. But instead of having like the strength of the Incredible Hulk, which I think this illustrates that she is strong, but she's not as strong as the Incredible Hulk, which makes sense. That's the way it always was in the comics. Like Bruce Banner as the Incredible Hulk was always the strongest of all the different Hulks, right? Like Abomination and like Doc Samson and She-Hulk and, you know, Red She-Hulk, which is what Betty Ross became, and like any of those versions of the Hulk out there, he was always the strongest of them. So I'm glad they maintained that. But to compensate for that, it basically was She-Hulk using the ability to just create a huge tidal wave of sounds that in turn just like almost crippled Bruce Banner, right? Brought him to his knees. I loved this. I love that they did that. I thought that was really, really cool. Of course, we also got like the references to like Avengers and Thor Ragnarok. That kind of made sense. We sort of expected that. And even with Banner, I expected that to a degree, right? Once she did like a flashback and said, okay, so I was on a drive with my cousin, I was certainly expecting there to be like some discussion back and forth about the kind of things that happened. I like that they skipped over that, to be honest with you guys, and I know that might be a little bit of a controversial statement. I use the phrase controversial loosely because I can't think of another word to use besides that. That's not controversial at all by any standard of measurement, but I imagine there might be some folks who kind of gripe about it a little bit. We know the story of the Incredible Hulk. We know the story of Banner. We've been following it for 10 years. We don't need it told back to us again. So I like that they basically skipped over that, and she's literally just like, wow, you know, that's a great big huge long-winded answer to the question, what have you been getting into? So I definitely dig that whole thing. Something that I also thought was really, really interesting, and I think this is really a reference to what will become the World War Hulk event, likely leading out of Planet Hulk or something out of those lines, is when they're visited by like the Sakaran ship, right? The one that shows up in the first place. What's likely happening here is that the people of Sakaar are trying to get Bruce Banner to be like the Sakarson, right? To like come back and be the ruler of Sakaar. Now, whether that's because Sakaar itself has fallen into a state of like civil war, whether it's because of the fact that they see him as still like the best person to lead because he was their champion for so long, whatever the reason is, that's likely what's happening here. Now, whether or not that leads to him actually traveling back to Sakaar, things unfold by whatever manner and whatever means, and that leads to the events of like World War Hulk, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think there's really no major news coming out about World War Hulk outside of like, it's an idea that Marvel Studios is kicking around and may end up becoming a TV show at some point. Outside of that, like there's really nothing going on there. So I imagine that question will likely be answered as far as the She-Hulk show goes. Outside of that, I don't really know where they would have a place to answer that question. It would seem really weird if we get like a second post-credit scene in Ant-Man Quantumania where like Bruce Banner shows up on Sakaar and is like, I will be your Sakarson. Like it would just feel out of place. This is the best place to handle that. If that does happen, that'll probably happen happen at the end of the show. Or at the very least, we'll get an answer to the question of what's going on with the people of Sakaar, and it's most likely them wanting him to become the Sakaarson. So I'm kind of curious to see where that goes. One of the things that's also kind of strange here, and I'm not entirely sure how to make of this, that Bruce Banner actually used the blood of Jennifer Walters to heal himself because of just the unique way in which she handles gamma radiation. This might be one of those caveats there, but the Incredible Hulk already has a healing factor, and it's one of those things that just never really quite sat with me very well, in the sense that like his arm was broken and like it's finally healed because he could use gamma radiation. That like what would essentially happen here, because it's the way it plays out in the comics, what would happen is that like if Bruce Banner, for example, his like Bruce Banner, the human form, his arm was broken, he would turn into the Hulk, the healing factor would heal his arm, and then he'd go right back to being Bruce Banner, and his arm would be healed, right? His bone would be set. It wouldn't go back. It's not as though he would turn into the Hulk's arm's fine, he goes back into Banner, and like his bone breaks as he's transitioning back because, you know, continuity. It doesn't really work that way. So it's one of those things that just never quite sat with me in that way. I always thought it was a little strange. That may have been something they were just kind of setting aside so that they could basically focus on the, I guess, enhanced healing factor of Jennifer Walters and what it all means, you know, whether it means that she's just more capable, it's just kind of her benefit of being the Hulk, because for the most part, when it comes to the different variations of the Hulk, they all have their own benefits, right? So like Red Hulk emits high levels of heat, Bruce Banner, of course, has like infinite strength, She-Hulk can break the fourth wall and be relevant occasionally in the comics, right? Abomination's just super strong and huge. There's all kinds of different things, these small little caveats that they have, although I guess more recently in the comics, the Incredible Hulk is now the Immortal Hulk, the Devil Hulk, so technically he can never die. He'll always come back to life no matter what happens. But regardless, it's these small little Easter eggs and these small little moments that go into this that I absolutely loved.
Hey guys, Rob was already on a trip when he noticed this detail he had missed. Irony, I know. But the Gamma DNA sequencer that was developed by Bruce Banner and Tony Stark looks like the DNA sequencer that showed up in Grant Morrison's New X-Men. This story explained the different programs from Weapons Plus in Marvel Comics. Weapon 10, or Weapon X, being Wolverine. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's a direct reference to Wolverine, but this could definitely circle back around in the MCU later on. And yeah, that's all I got. Back to Rob.
Of course, one of the other things that we found that I'm actually not a big fan of, or I guess maybe I am, but I'm not, Bruce Banner refers to himself as the Smart Hulk instead of the Professor Hulk. Now, that's not a terrible thing, and the reason why is because the Professor Hulk is an actual version of the Hulk that exists. So that might be something that they're saving, because when it comes to Professor Hulk, that was basically the result of what happened when Bruce Banner and the different variations of the Incredible Hulk all basically had a kind of mental truce in terms of like what you see in the MCU right now regarding Banner and the main Hulk, and that in turn, once they kind of merged together in a singular personality, that's where you got Professor Hulk from. So essentially it was all the intelligence of Bruce Banner combined with the unlimited strength of the Incredible Hulk, which is kind of what you see here with Smart Hulk. They're simply just not calling him that. So I don't know if it's one of those things where instead of saying Professor Hulk, it's Smart Hulk, they both mean the same thing, or if it's one of those where they're literally holding Professor Hulk off because there's other Hulk personalities that they're going to introduce later on down the line. Gray Hulk, Joe Fixit, Devil Hulk, all that kind of stuff, and then we'll end up seeing them kind of converge into one version, which ends up becoming the Professor Hulk. Again, I don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case, but we also got small little moments here, right? Like Iron Man's helmet was broken, which was maintained by Bruce Banner. That's one of the things that I loved about the show, is that it focused a lot on the relationship between Bruce and Tony, which I didn't really even know existed. I mean, you knew they were like friends and they hung out. I mean, you could tell that from like the first Avengers, that if for no other reason than just the intelligence they shared, there was camaraderie there. I mean, we saw that in like Avengers Age of Ultron. The two of them worked on projects together, but we didn't know how far reaching their friendship was. If it was just kind of like professional respect and like the friendship that comes with being an Avenger, and that's where it ends. But the idea of Tony Stark like building a whole facility for Bruce Banner, the fact that like Bruce Banner built a bar, Tony Stark just sat there and got drunk and watched it all. Obviously, they were incredibly close as far as friends went, so much so that Bruce Banner kept the helmet of Tony Stark, and most likely it was probably given to him, right? It was probably like in the last will and testament of Tony, make sure Banner gets my helmet, right? That kind of a thing. So I do love that whole relationship between the two of them. I loved the way that unfolded. Now, as far as what we'll end up seeing in the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I'm not entirely sure when it comes to She-Hulk, right? I don't know exactly how everything is going to play out. The character as she's presented in the show is for the most part pretty true to form with the comics, right? That unlike Bruce Banner, who turns into the Incredible Hulk, and it's literally a whole other personality, and they just don't really like each other, that She-Hulk and Jennifer Walters are effectively the same thing, right? That like literally Jennifer Walters turns into She-Hulk and maintains herself. So it's really her just being granted access to powers, but still maintaining herself in the process. So the way that she works now, it's really no different than somebody who suddenly emerges with like telepathy or telekinesis or something like that. It's just a power they can use. She just happens to get bigger and change colors when she does. That's basically it. I do like that. It is very, very true to form. I don't know if they're going to go to the direction of these, of really the kind of stories we got in like the old Fantastic Four stories or what have you, where she basically lost her ability to become Jennifer Walters and was stuck in her She-Hulk form. Depending on how they want things to go with their character, if what they're looking to do is keep Mark Ruffalo around and basically have him stay as the Incredible Hulk in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the foreseeable future, there's ample things they can do. They can throw him on the Defenders and they can put Jennifer Walters on the Avengers, assuming that we actually get a tried and true Defenders team. The makings are there, right? Name of the Submariner is going to be in Black Panther 2. The Silver Surfer will arrive when when Galactus appears in the MCU. You've already got Doctor Strange, so it's most likely that we're going to end up seeing the Defenders in that way, even if it's not perfectly true to comics. You've already kind of got the trappings that are there for the team to be made. It could also be one of those things where Banner stays on the Avengers and that She-Hulk ends up becoming a part of the Fantastic Four. Maybe something happens to Ben Grimm and that's it, right? You go into like Avengers Secret Wars, Ben Grimm can't be the thing anymore, he's stuck in his human form, whatever the case is, She-Hulk takes his place. It's what happened in the comics, so it makes perfect sense. By the way, if you see anybody get mad about the idea of She-Hulk replacing Ben Grimm on the Fantastic Four, you immediately know that person has never read comics, because that's exactly what happens in the comics. So do not take that person seriously. But outside of that, I'm curious to see where things go for her character. I do love the show. I'm having a great time watching it. I'm excited to see what happens in the next few episodes. So let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Did you guys enjoy the show? I'm sure there are people who are going to be like, derp, women are bad, this show sucks. I mean, I'm sure you're going to see some of those, but barring people who are just being outrageously angry about something that doesn't make any sense to be outrageously angry about, what did you think about it? I'm excited to see it. But thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.